Chapter 6, in which the wizards do some snooping and Cimorene snoops back. For the next 3 weeks, Cimorene spent most of her free time studying the fireproofing spell and collecting the ingredients she would need to cast it. A few, like the wolfsbane and feverfew, she could gather herself from the herbs that grew on the slopes of the mountain. Eleonora found a little jar of hippopotamus oil among the cosmetics left by her predecessor. The unicorn water Cimorene got from Morwen, after promising her a copy of the spell if it worked. She went to Kazul about the white eagle feathers, though she was a little afraid to explain what she wanted them for. She didn't want Kazul to think that she was worried about her, losing her temper and accidentally roasting her. Fortunately, the dragon found the whole idea very interesting. "It could be very useful," Kazul said reflectively. "There are enough hot-tempered youngsters around that it would be well worth fireproofing the princesses who have to deal with them." "I'm not sure I'll be able to fireproof anyone at all," the princess said. "I still need the white eagle feathers and the powdered hen's teeth, and nobody seems to have any." "I'll see what I can do," Kazul said, and a few days later she dropped a bundle of white feathers at the door of the kitchen. Half a feather was stuck in one of her right claws, and another was caught between 2 of her teeth, and she looked very pleased with herself. Cimorene decided not to ask any awkward questions. Even Kazul, however, could not find any hen's teeth, so Cimorene had to keep putting off trying out the spell. When she wasn't working on collecting the ingredients for the fireproofing spell, Cimorene read Historia Dracorum. It was very difficult at first. After all, it had been a long time since her last Latin lesson. She kept working on it until she started remembering the right endings and conjugations and cases. Shortly after that, she realized that she was not having to look up quite as many words as she had at the beginning. From then on, her progress was rapid. It helped that she found the book fascinating. Dragon history was not a subject commonly taught to princesses in Linderwall, but as she was now a dragon's princess, she had personal reasons to be interested. However, besides, the history of the dragons was very exciting. Every page was full of descriptions of dragons ravaging villages, carrying off princesses, defeating knights and princes, and occasionally being defeated by them, and fighting with wizards, giants, and each other. When the book wasn't describing battles, it was describing famous dragons' hordes and peculiar draconian customs. Cimorene was in the library with the Historia Dracorum in front of her and her Latin dictionary on the table beside her left hand when she heard someone calling from the front of the cave. She had hoped it would be at least a little longer before the night started coming back, so she couldn't help sighing as she stuck a leather bookmark in the book and closed it. Then she went out to argue with whoever it was until they went away. 2 wizards were standing just outside of the mouth of the cave. Cimorene saw their wooden staffs first before she was close enough to see their faces. As she came nearer, she recognized the one on the left as Zeminar. The one on the right was taller and younger. His brown hair and beard showed no trace of gray. His blue and brown robes were identical to the older wizard's except for the colors. His eyes were the same bright black as his companions, and he looked at Cimorene in a way that made her feel uneasy. "Good morning to you, Princess Cimorene," Zeminar said. "I thought I would take you up on your kind offer to visit. I hope we haven't come at an inconvenient time." "Not at all," Cimorene said, thinking hard. She had promised Kazul that she would try to find out what Zeminar was after if he showed up, and here he was. Maybe if she convinced him that she was as silly as her sisters, he would be careless enough to let something slip. "I thought perhaps we might have since it took you so long to come out," Zeminar said mildly, but Cimorene thought there was a hint of suspicion in his eyes. "I must not have heard you right away," Cimorene said, batting her eyes innocently, the way her youngest sister did whenever she did something particularly foolish. "Kazul has quite a large set of caves, and I was in one of the ones at the back. I'm so sorry." "Ah," Zeminar stroked his beard with his left hand, "that would make it difficult for you. Perhaps we could set up a spell for you, one that would let you know whenever anyone comes to visit. It would be more pleasant for visitors, too, if they didn't have to shout. What do you think, Entoril?" "Like the ones at the headquarters of the society," the second wizard said, nodding. "We can do it in 2 or 3 minutes right from here. It'd be easy." Zeminar shot a dark look at his companion, and Cimorene was sure that he wanted to pretend he was inventing a difficult new spell so that he would have an excuse to wander around the caves. "Quite so," said Zeminar. "Well, Princess?" "Oh, dear, I don't know," Cimorene said, doing her best to imitate the way her eldest sister behaved whenever anyone wanted her to decide anything. It sounds very nice, but Gazelle is so picky about where things go and how things are done. No, I couldn't. I simply couldn't let you do anything like that without asking her first. What a pity, Zeminar said. His companion coughed and shuffled his feet. Ah, yes. Allow me to present my son, Antrel. I hope you don't mind my bringing him along. Oh, of course not, Cimorene said politely. I am pleased to make the acquaintance of such a lovely princess, Antrel said, bowing. Cimorene blinked. This wasn't getting anywhere. Maybe if she brought them inside, they'd relax a little. Thank you, she said to Antrel. Won't you come in and have some tea? We would be delighted, Cimorene said quickly, if you would lead the way, princess. This way, Cimorene said. She stopped just inside the mouth of the cave and gave the wizards her sweetest and most innocent smile. You can leave your staffs right here. Just lean them up against the wall. Antrel looked considerably startled, and Zeminar frowned. Is this too something your dragon requires? He said. I don't know, Cimorene said, wrinkling up her forehead the way her third from eldest sister did whenever she was puzzled, which was often. But they'll be so awkward in the kitchen, don't you think? There's not very much room. We'll manage, Zeminar said. Cimorene hadn't really expected to get the wizards to let go of their staffs, but it had been worth a try. She shrugged and smiled and led them into the kitchen, where she had made a point of bumping into the staffs or tripping over them every time she went by. Finally, Antrel turned his sideways and stuck it under the table. Zeminar hung on to his with a kind of grimace, suspicious stubbornness that made Cimorene wonder whether she was fooling him at all with her pretended silliness. The wizards made uncomfortable conversation about the weather and the size of the kitchen for several minutes, while Cimorene fixed the tea and poured it. Are the rest of Gazelle's caves this large? Zeminar asked, as Cimorene handed him his teacup. She had given him the one with the broken handle, even though he was a guest, because she didn't trust him. Yeah. Oh, yes, Cimorene said. She was beginning to think she was never going to find out anything. The two wizards seemed perfectly happy to sit at the kitchen table and talk about nothing, whatever, for hours. Remarkable, said Antrel in an admiring tone. You know, we wizards don't often get to see the inside of dragons' caves. I'll bet you don't, thought Cimorene as she gave him a puzzled smile. Oh, that's too bad, she said aloud. Yes, it is, Cimorene said. Perhaps you'd be willing to show us around? Cimorene thought very rapidly. It was obvious that she wasn't going to learn anything if the wizard sat at the kitchen table and drank tea, so she decided to take a chance. Well, she said in a doubtful tone, I suppose it would be all right as long as I don't take you into the treasure rooms. Oh, that's fine, Antrel said, a little too quickly. You won't touch anything, will you? Cimorene said as they stood up. Gazelle is so particular about where things are kept. Of course not, Cimorene said, smiling insincerely. Cimorene smiled back and led the way out into the hall. She watched the wizards carefully as she took them through the large main cave and the general storage caverns and the big cavern where Gazelle visited with other dragons. Zeminar made polite noises about the size and comfort of everything, but neither he nor Antrel seemed very interested. And this is the library, Cimorene said, throwing the door open. I am impressed, Zeminar said, and Cimorene could tell that he meant it. She stepped sideways so that she could keep an eye on both of the wizards at the same time. A remarkable collection, Antrel commented. He began walking around the room, admiring the bookshelves and scanning the titles of the books. What's this? Cimorene said, bending over the table. The Historia Dracorium. A surprising choice for light reading, princess. His eyes met Cimorene's, and they were hard and bright and suspicious. Oh, I'm not reading it, Cimorene said hastily, opening her eyes very wide. I just thought it would make the library look nicer to have a book or two sitting out on the table. More lived in. Zeminar nodded, looking relieved and faintly contemptuous. I think it works very well, princess, he said. Very well indeed. And then he looked over to the other side of the room and said sharply, Antrel, what are you doing? Cimorene turned her head in time to see Antrel put out a hand and gingerly tip several books off of one of the shelves. Stop that, she said, forgetting to sound silly. I'm very sorry, princess, Antrel said. Will you help me put them back where they belong? She had no choice but to go over and help him. It took several minutes to get everything back in place because he kept dropping more things. She got quite annoyed with him and finally did it all herself. As she started to turn back into the center of the room, she caught a glimpse of Zeminar hastily closing the Historia Dracorium. She pretended not to notice, but she made a mental note that he had been looking at something near the middle of the book. That was dreadfully careless of you, she said, frowning at Aunt Turtle. Very clumsy, Zeminar agreed. I don't know what Kazoo will say when she finds out about it. The princess went on. Really, it is too bad of you. I did ask you not to touch anything, you know. Yes, you did, Zeminar said, and I wouldn't like to think that we gotten you in trouble. Perhaps it would be best if you didn't mention to Gazelle that we were here at all. Oh, I suppose I could do that, Cimorene said in a doubtful tone. Of course you can, Aunt Turtle said encouragingly, and I'll come back in a few days to make sure everything's all right. I think it's time we were on our way, Zeminar said, giving his son a dark look. Thank you for showing us around, Princess. The princess escorted them out of the cave and made sure that they had left, then hurried back to the library. She spent the next several hours poring over the middle parts of the Historiogrorium, trying to figure out what Zeminar had been looking at. She was still there when Kazoo arrived home and called for her. That wizard Zeminar finally came. He brought his son along with him, she said as she came out of the library. I know, the dragon said. Her voice sounded a little thick, as if she had a cold. I could smell them the minute I came in. Is that why you sound so odd? The princess asked. You're not going to sneeze, are you? I don't think so, Kazoo replied. Don't worry about it. I'll have plenty of time to turn my head away. I wish I could get a hold of some hen's teeth, Cimorene said, frowning. That fireproof spell. Have you looked in the treasure rooms? Kazoo asked. No, the princess replied, startled. She remembered seeing a number of jars and bottles in various shapes and sizes when she had organized the treasure, and none of them had been labeled. I didn't think of it, and besides, it's your treasure. You're my princess, at least until someone rescues you or I decide otherwise, the dragon pointed out. Go ahead and look, and if you find any hen's teeth, use them. Be careful when you're checking in the jars, though. There are one or two with lead stoppers that shouldn't be opened. Lead stoppers, Cimorene said. I'll remember. Good. Now what did those wizards want? I'm not sure. The princess explained everything that happened, including how she had seen Zeminar closing the history book as she turned, and how the two wizards had been perfectly willing to leave right after that. But just before they disappeared, Aunt Turtle said he might come back another time, the princess concluded, so I don't know whether they found what they were looking for or not. Do you know which part of the Historiogrorium Zeminar was reading? The dragon asked. Somewhere in the middle, a little past my bookmark. I was just looking at it when you came in. It's the part about how the dragons came to the mountains of morning and settled into the caves and chose a king. That's the section where the Historia describes the caves of fire and night, isn't it? She said. The princess nodded. There was a whole page about somebody finding a stone in the cave so that the dragons could pick a king. It didn't make much sense to me. Colin Stone, Kazoo said, nodding. We used it to choose our king ever since the first time. When a king dies, all the dragons go to the ford of whispering snakes in the enchanted forest and take turns trying to move Colin Stone from there to the vanishing mountains. The one that succeeds is the next king. What if there are two dragons strong enough to move it? It's not a matter of strength, Kazoo said. Colin Stone isn't much larger than you are. Even a small dragon can carry that much weight twice around the enchanted forest without any trouble at all. But Colin Stone has an aura, a kind of vibration. When you carry it, you can feel it humming through your claws, and the humming gets stronger the farther you go until your bones are shaking. Most dragons have to drop it or they'll be shaken to pieces. But there's always one who is suited to the stone. For that dragon, the stone's humming is just a pleasant buzz, so of course it's easy to get into the vanishing mountain. You sound as if you've had experience, Cimorene said. Of course, she responded matter-of-factly. I was old enough to participate in the tests when the last king died. She smiled reminiscently. I got further than anyone expected me to, though I wasn't one of the top 10 by any means. Cimorene tilted her head to one side, considering. I think I'm glad you didn't win. Oh, why is that? She sounded amused. Because you wouldn't have had any use for a princess if you were the queen of dragons, and if you hadn't decided to take me on, that yellow-green dragon Morans would have probably have eaten me, she replied. You mean if I were the king of dragons, Kazoo corrected her. Queen of the dragons is a dull job. But you're a female, she said. If you carried Colin Stone from the Fort of Whispering Snakes to the Vanishing Mountain, you have to be a queen, wouldn't you? No, of course not, she said. Queen of the Dragons is a totally different job from king, and it's not one I'm particularly interested in. Most people aren't. I think that position's been vacant since Orion tore his wing and had to retire. But King Tokos is a male dragon, she said, then frowned. Isn't he? Yes, but that has nothing to do with it, she said, a little testily. King is the name of the job. It doesn't matter who holds. You mean that dragons don't care whether their king is male or female. The title is the same no matter who the ruler is. That's right, we like to keep things simple. Oh, she decided to return to the original topic of conversation before the dragon's simple ideas confused her any further. Why would the wizards be interested in Colin Stone if it's only used for picking out the kings of the dragons? I doubt that they are, she replied. However, Colin Stone was found in the caves of fire and night, and wizards have always been interested in the caves. But the dragons control most of them, and all the easy entrances are ours, so the wizards have never been able to find out as much as they would like. The Historia Dracorum is one of the few books that talks about the caves at all, and there aren't many copies. I'll wager Zeminar would have stolen it outright if he thought he could get away with it. I thought the dragons let wizards into the caves of fire and night, she objected. Why would Zeminar be poking through history books looking for information if he can just go and look at them whenever he wants to? We don't let the wizards visit the caves whenever they want, Cazelle said. If we did, they'd be running in and out all the time, and nobody would be able to breathe without sneezing. No, they're limited to certain days and times, and if they want to visit the caves of fire and night otherwise, they have to use one of the entrances we don't control. Few of them try. The other ways of getting into the caves are very dangerous, even for wizards. Maybe they're looking for an easier way in? Cazelle did not seem to be paying much attention. She thought for a moment, then turned toward the cave mouth. I'm going to go see Gorham. Roxham said a book had been stolen from her library, and I want to know which one. I'll be back in a few hours. I think I'll go look at that Historia Dracorum again while you're gone, she said thoughtfully. If there's something useful in it about the caves of fire and night, maybe I can find it, now that I know what I'm looking for. Cimorene spent the rest of the afternoon carefully translating the chapter that talked about the caves. She was disappointed to find that there was very little about the caves themselves, though what was there was interesting. The book told of how the dragons had discovered the back way into the caves, and described some of the things that they had found in them. Caverns full of blue and green fire, pools of black liquid that could cast a cloud of darkness for 20 miles around if you poured 3 drops on the ground, walls made of crystal that multiplied every sound 1,000-fold, rocks that spurted fire when they were broken. Most of the rest of the chapter was about Colin Stone and how it was taken out of the caves by the first king of the dragons. Cazelle returned just before dinner, and she and Cimorene compared notes. Cimorene told Cazelle what she had learned from the chapter of the caves of fire and night, and then Cazelle explained what she had learned from Gorham. The stolen book was the king of the dragons, and the entire first section was about Colin Stone and the caves of fire and night, Cazelle said. And only a wizard could have gotten past the spells and safeguards Gorham's puts on her library. I think that settles it. The wizards are definitely collecting information about the caves of fire and night. Then why do they keep looking at books and dragon history? Cimorene asked. Seems like a roundabout way of finding out whatever it is that they want to know. There isn't any other way to do it, the dragon said. Nobody but dragons has ever had much to do with the caves, and no one has written much about them, except as a reliable route into the enchanted forest. But for what I've been reading in the Historia Dracorum, the caves sound fascinating, Cimorene said. You mean to say that no one has ever written anything about the caves of fire and night except for dragons? That's... She stopped suddenly, and her eyes narrowed. No, that's not right. There was a rather rumpled scholar who talked his way into the caves a century or so back, and after he left, he wrote an extremely dry book about what he found there. I'd forgotten about him. Do you have a copy? She asked hopefully. No, but I don't think the Society of Wizards does either. There weren't many of them printed, and a lot of them were lost in a flood a few years later. Some hero or other shoved a giant into a lake to drown him. The silly Clunch didn't realize that if he put something that big into a lake, that the water would have to go somewhere. Well, that doesn't do us much good, Cimorene said. It's nice that the Society of Wizards doesn't have a copy of that book, but if we can't get a hold of one either... I didn't say that, she said. I don't have a copy myself, but I do know who does. Who? Cimorene said impatiently. Morwen, and I'm afraid you're not going to be able to work on that fireproofing spell of yours tomorrow. We're going to take a trip to the enchanted forest instead.